for justice in Halfway Tree, where we went from the passport office back to the transport center, going around with the support of the Tivoli Gardens drum corps and drill team. An excellent performance from them, some very talented young performers. But we were able in that time to highlight some of those landmark cases. We were also supported by one of our longtime clients, Miss Rosalie Reed, who was there to support her brother who was killed by security forces, Odin Reed. So it was a good day of celebration.
13 years and she still has not gotten justice for the family.
Indeed, indeed. So it was a good day of celebration, but also a day of reflection for us on some of those poignant cases. So we want to thank those persons who were out with us. Thank you so much for your support. And of course, there will be several more interventions like that as a part of our justice tour going into next year. So look out for those announcements on our social media pages.
Yeah. No, on Sunday night, thanks Jade, we had our Human Rights Day reception and a soft launch, if you will. It was not a fulsome thing.
Yes.
A soft launch of our 25th anniversary that we will be celebrating come 2024. So JFJ officially turns 25 in August 2024, and we have different periods that we're going to be celebrating. Now, Susan Goff did such a great presentation at our event, talking about the tapestry of JFJ and how important the different threads have been in terms of the contributions and the thematic areas of focus in terms of family support and so on. And JFJ started in April 1999, and I just wanted to run through it quickly, because I think it's an important conversation to have, not only within the context of the 25th anniversary launch, but as we contemplate how far we've come in human rights in the country. So we started in April 1999, protesting the gas tax that was imposed by the then Prime Minister, the Honorable P.J. Patterson.
Yes.
31%. And as the stories are told, you had what you would call the two Jamaicas protesting. You had those who were from the inner city communities, those who were from what you would call the uptown communities. At that time, at the foot of Jack's Hill, we eventually came together. People were outraged. By the way, P.J. Patterson had to roll back that gas tax because of what had happened in the country at that time. But an important part of the history, and I'm so happy as Susan told it, because what is disheartening for us, that just last week a stalwart in JFJ's history passed away, and her name is Miss Jenny Cameron. She is the mother of Michael Gale. This is the second case that JFJ took on in August 1999, where Michael Gale, a young mentally ill man, was killed by the security forces in Olympic Gardens, beaten to death. He didn't die on the spot, actually. He was vomiting blood and so on. He died at the hospital. And it was through the insistence and the perseverance of his mother, Jenny, who died a horrible death last week, killed at gunpoint. But her role in JFJ's history was that she pushed us as we supported her in bringing the matter all the way to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, when the government at the time decided that we're not going to be prosecuting this matter. She took it to IACHR with JFJ's support, and the family was awarded some $3 million. Then you had Hugh Small, supported by Sherian McGregor, who worked on this case in the early days, of course. But our advocacy did not stop there. Because of Miss Cameron, because of founders such as Dr. Caroline Gomes, who also spoke at the event on December 10th, the advocacy, and this is it with an organization like ours, it doesn't just stop with a court matter being won, so to speak. It's institutional changes towards justice reform. So because of Miss Jenny Cameron, because of JFJ, We had the Indicom being established in 2010. Mr. Hugh Faulkner, the current commissioner of Indicom, also extended his condolences, as did Mr. Hugh Small with Miss Cameron's passing. So JFJ, we have had such a instrumental and influential history in terms of the cases. But as we approach 2024, we're going to be fulsomely diving into that history as we celebrate our 25-year legacy of justice in Jamaica. And the current team, we're all motivated each time we hear Dr. Gomes and Susan Goff and so on speaks, because we have to push ahead and realize that we have to move the needle a step further to continue this great legacy. So it's such a humbling thing just to be a part of JFJ for me personally, and I hope the team shares that sentiment, of course. Towards the second half of the program, Jade, we're going to be talking about Human Rights Day. Some comments from the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and some comments from the Information Minister and others. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Mikhail. So as we go into our fulsome topic, I would love to give you our right of the day today and our trivia question. And our right of the day today is from our Constitution, and it relates to your right to equality before the law. And this simply means that all individuals, regardless of their background, characteristics, or status, is treated equally in the eyes of the law, and this includes the equal protection and benefit of the law. One major point of JFJ's advocacy has been the unequal protection, for example, of men and boys from sexual violence, which will make up a important point in our substantive topic. So today's right, that you have a right under your Constitution, Section 13(1)(g), to be considered equal before the law and receive equal protection and benefit of the law. Now, our trivia question for today relates to our Domestic Violence Act, and we ask, what year did our Domestic Violence Act first come into force? And if you've been listening to our show in any capacity, you would have heard this many times, so I should expect our trivia question to be answered very quickly today, and you can do so by sending us a WhatsApp at 2397583 or responding to it on our social media pages. Now, our fulsome topic for today is where are we now, Jamaica's legislative and policy response to GBV. And we'll be joined by several persons on this. Professor Diana Fox, who is the University Director of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, the head of that same institute, Dr. Karen Carpenter, and longtime gender advocate and supporter of the organization as well, Miss Hilary Nicholson. So on the 1st of December, 13 civil society groups, including JFJ and 19 advocates, would have penned an open letter to parliamentarians urging several reforms in the response to gender-based and domestic violence in Jamaica. And this urgency is related to devastating statistics amongst the incidence of rape and grievous sexual assault in the country, with 475 reported cases of rape and 338 reported cases of grievous sexual assault in 2022. Now, in addition to those statistics, the Domestic Violence Intervention Centers recorded 1,720 intimate partner violence cases and 924 family violence cases, with more than 650 reports coming from children. And all of these concerns are separate from those cases that have been managed by civil society actors such as Jamaicans for Justice, E for Life, and several others.
You know, what is concerning for us is that since 2014, the Joint Select Committee was established by Parliament, as is legislatively required. There was a pause in, following the first sitting after they heard numerous submissions from civil society. We had to be calling on them in 2016, 2017, early 2018, saying to them, let us reconvene that Joint Select Committee and look at the recommendations. There were several sittings in 2018. A report finalized in the end of 2018, published in 2019. It's now 2023. no substantive changes have been made to repeal marital rape provisions under Section 5 of the Sexual Offences Act. The government has indicated that they will not be redefining rape unless there's a referendum that touches or addresses burglary, which is quite problematic, not constitutionally required. And quite frankly, as we said in our open letter, it is reneging on one's responsibility that they have as parliamentarians. Other matters that are before it, closing age exemptions for children who are having sex with each other under age 16. But what is interesting is that on December 5, you had the Honourable Minister Olivia Bamsey-Grange, who indicated that a Domestic Violence Act or a bill will be tabled in Parliament this week. So we will be watching Parliament today to ascertain whether such bill has been tabled. But what is also of need for call from civil society is the level of involvement. How open will that Joint Select Committee sitting be, wherein, the timeline and so on. But certainly we're saying to the government of Jamaica that April 2024 should not pass and you do not have a recommendation report finalized so that we can see the Act, Domestic Violence Act, being revised at some point in 2024, very, very early, because it has been far too long. But our call goes beyond the Domestic Violence Act to be touching on the Sexual Offences Act, Offences Against the Persons Act, and so on, that deals broadly with sexual violence. So just to put that quickly in context as our guests share their perspectives. I think let us take the break, and when we regroup, then we have the full discussion with our family members, if you will.
Importers! Are you tired of the hassle? Are you tired of the wait? Value your time because we value yours. Request contactless clearance through your agent to clear your personal, non-commercial shipments at the ports. It is more efficient. It is secure. For more details, email Jamaica Customs at contactlessclearance@jca.gov.jm. Contactless clearance, powered by the Jamaica Customs Agency. Jamaica Customs, keeping our customers in focus.
Tell me where you get the money transferred. Where you get the money transferred. Where you get the money transferred.
Christmas a come, give our money a run. Ask your sender to select cash pickup and collect your MoneyGram money transfer of $150 or more until December 23 at any Alliance agent for a chance to be one of 14 winners of 100,000 Jamaican dollars from each parish.
Tell me where you get the money transferred.
Conditions apply. Authorized under Section 58.3 of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act.
You're now in tune to
The Bridge 99 FM
from Jamaica
To the world.
right.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing where are we now, Jamaica's legislative and policy response to GBV. And I know that we are already joined by our three guests, Professor Diana Fox, Dr. Karen Carpenter, Miss Hilary Nicholson. But before we ask for their perspective, I will ask my engineer to quickly play the clip from our minister on her intentions for the Domestic Violence Act.
Great pleasure to actually indicate today that we are far advanced in treating with amendments to the Domestic Violence Act. And it will address the low-hanging fruits that came out of the Joint Select that were recommended. And it also includes fine for breach of protection order. It includes how we will treat with perpetrator use of firearm, and a number of other. There were 6 amendments that were seen as low-hanging fruits. And we will be addressing that matter next week, where I will name the members of a Joint Select Committee. Because where we have reached now is the drafters are drafting, just about finished drafting, the amendments to the bill. It will go to LegCom committee. It will come to Parliament through a Joint Select Committee, and then the bill will be tabled.
And that was Honorable Babsy Grange, or Minister of Culture, Gender, so on and so forth.
And I think, my apologies for misquoting the minister, she had indicated that the joint select committees will be named, not the actual tabling of the bill, which is what we really need a timeline around.
Yes, exactly. So we are joined, as we said, by Professor Diana Fox, Dr. Carpenter, Miss Larry Nicholson. And I thank you all, firstly, for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I'll start with you, Professor Fox. I hope you were all able to hear the clip being played just now, just to get your perspective on that statement from the minister.
Well, I think it's a welcome statement. And first of all, hello, thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I think it is a welcome statement. But I also think that given the urgency of the issue and the high rates of domestic violence in Jamaica, there must be some rapid action that is taken. And among those, in addition to accepting the recommendations of the Joint Committee, there needs to be a definition of domestic violence that is much broader, that includes not only physical violence, but verbal violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, socioeconomic violence. And there are other additional amendments that should be addressed. I don't want to take up too much time, and so I can leave it to my colleagues to address other areas. But there are a whole slate of recommendations that need to come in addition to what the minister has stated.
Thank you for that, Professor Fox. And I know Dr. Carpenter should have been familiar with the original process that we would have gone through to give these recommendations prior. And I wonder how you feel hearing another set of promises coming from the minister as it regards to implementing these recommendations that we've been waiting on for so long.
Well, I think, and again, as Professor Fox said, thank you for having us. Happy to join in the discussion, and certainly celebrating with JFJ your soon-to-be 25th year.
Yes.
I feel it's the 25th year already. So we want to recognize the important work that JFJ is doing in galvanizing the public, in making people aware. And I think the minister herself has a very difficult task. So I'm not underplaying what it takes to change hearts and minds in this country, how we overcome cultural and other sort of endemic biases towards women being treated as large children. And if we treat our children in a punitive fashion, emotionally, psychologically, physically, then we can hardly expect better for our women. So I do recognize that, yes, it's another set of promises, but I don't want us to lose sight as well of the trajectory, that long road that we have come down. I want us to keep positive so that we can really effect the rest of changes that are needed. This is a baton change. You know, you can see from the heads in this Zoom, yourself and Jade excluded, that we have been in this thing for a long time when you look at all the gray hairs in our hair. So it is really a question of not losing sight of the goal, recognizing the gains, and encouraging the minister. I believe in positive reinforcement, encouraging the minister to move faster, move more fulsomely, as Professor Fox said, more inclusively, and to effect change that is meaningful in Jamaica. Change as a kind of decoration isn't going to work at this time.
I'm in full agreement with that. You know, you are all signatories to the open letter that we would have penned, and the letter would have contained some of those recommendations that we've been calling for so long. And as we look at, for example, the recommendation to increase the fines, we got some pushback to say that we're often calling for less punitive measures. So how are we calling for an increase of the fines? No. And I would ask Ms. Nicholson, as it pertains to the increase in fines, what would you hope that such an amendment would do? Like, what is the effect that we're hoping to see with some of these recommendations? think you're a bit muted. Don't know if our engineer can
My
assist.
apologies.
Yes.
I was making sure I was muted in deference in respect to my colleagues. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for including me in the discussion. One of the main, and congrats, many congrats to Jamaican for Justice. I sit aside and I wonder at the incredible road that you have traveled and the achievements of Jamaicans for Justice. We've had the Domestic Violence Act around for nearly 30 years, and it is a major, it is an achievement because that's just a little over a generation. But also 30 years is no excuse for not having got it right. It is high time to get it right. And the increase in fines will help to all of us in society, girls and boys and women and men, legislators and non-legislators, ordinary citizens, to realize how serious domestic violence is. There has been a long tendency not to treat violence that takes place in the home, in a domestic environment, as seriously as community violence or violence out on the street. But when we think that our homes are the very places that we should be safe, where children should feel secure, where many women and children spend long hours, we realize that it is absolutely important that the very starting point where we should be protecting our citizens is the home. And the old-fashioned idea that the home is a private space where anything goes, that is utterly outdated. And in fact, we have reached a place nowadays, I think, in our society where people recognize that. But sometimes our legislators are very slow to recognize what much of the rest of society is seeing. So, small fines of $5,000 and $10,000, especially given the fact that Jamaican dollar devalues every year.
Yes.
And since those fines were instituted, the dollar has become less and less valuable. Those fines are a joke, given the seriousness of domestic violence. So the psychological, the physical, the sexual, the violence that is meted out to children and women, and sometimes to men, but far less often to men, can be life-threatening. But the impact and the trauma lasts for a lifetime.
Yes.
And we must recognize this and have fines imposed that reflect the seriousness of the abuse. So that's one thing. Now, whether they will act it as a deterrent, I honestly don't know. Because we have many deterrents in the law which fail to stop murder, which fail to stop the abuse of children, but that should not stop us from having penalties that recognize and reflect the seriousness of the crime.
Thank you so much. And
Can
I think
jump in and add something
yes,
here?
Professor Fox, please do.
So the tiered approach, as the letter states, recognizes that there are first, second, third offenses.
Yes.
And that is important. Repeat offenders must be punished for their repeat offenses. But there also needs to be supports that are put in for those, as Hillary was saying, who are victim survivors of this violence. And I think it would be helpful for listeners to understand the specific nature of the expenses that are incurred as a result of this kind of domestic violence. So, for example, loss of earnings.
Yes.
Persons can't go to work when they're bruised and maimed. Medical and dental expenses, other out-of-pocket expenses, compensation for injuries, perhaps even moving and accommodation expenses, and of course legal fees, and all of the supports that go into that. So these are basic supports that would come from the fees that are paid by the perpetrators.
And I think that while we're talking about the law, I think it's useful to recognize that a move has been made by the JCF, the Jamaica Constabulary Force, in introducing domestic violence intervention centers at a number of police stations.
Yes.
But what we must absolutely make sure and lobby for and demand is adequate funding and training for the personnel, because it serves no purpose to simply have these places in name and not ensure that there is really serious gender-sensitive, gender-responsive training for the staff at the centres and adequate funding by the state so that they can respond efficiently and immediately and compassionately, because domestic violence is a problem that needs immediate, absolutely immediate response. Sometimes the mother and the children are in immediate need. And along with that, a critical area of support must be the shelters that we have been promised and heard about for decades. Honestly, I'm sick and tired about hearing the shelters, and still we don't quite know how people can access protection in the shelters.
Because they're too low.
That's another public education, and we'll come to that at another time. But all of this is part of a serious commitment to protect people from domestic violence.
Yes.
If I might add to the conversation, a couple of things that both Hillary and Dana have said strike me as it relates to the way we're approaching things. We have an ecological model that says that there are three principles that we need to be consistent with and thinking of. The immediacy is very important, but also the long-term effects, as Hillary mentioned earlier, on the victims and even the perpetrator who feels in the long term they can repeat offend. Yes, this is a long-term effect for the perpetrator as well. We're tending to deal with this matter as a post hoc, after the fact matter. That once the woman, child is abused, and sometimes men, let's not forget that, then we deal with the results of the abuse. But we're not using principle one of the ecological model, which is prevention. If we are to prevent it from happening or happening again, then we must address perpetrators. And there are 4 or 5 ways in which we can address perpetrators that are inculcated in law in different countries in the Caribbean, including batterer responses and batterer rehabilitation. We cannot simply throw our hands up in the air and say we can't do anything about the perpetrators.
Yeah,
they're offending for a reason. And there are different types of violence, and we must make that part of the law. As it relates to the fines...
okay, so Dr. Carpenter, I'm going to ask you to pause for just a minute. We're going to pick up with you on that point after the break. So hold that thought for me, please.
This holiday season, enjoy a KFC Family 12 bucket with the ones you call family. KFC, it's finger-licking good. The time by KFC's festive feast is...
1:31.
Moment of motivation on the Bridge 99 FM.
Hear me, I say. Enjoy each accomplishment without trying to find another one. Savor the moment. Give thanks. Breathe. Smile. Yeah, man, you did it. It's okay to rest and feel good about what you have done.
Christmas is a colorful time of the year when loved ones near and far come together to celebrate. Your friends at the Insurance Company of the West Indies wish you and your family a holiday sparked with love, laughter, peace, and a new year filled with prosperity. ICWI is always here for you. Call 876-926-9040 or click icwi.com. Merry Christmas from our hearts to yours.
It's a festive feast this Christmas. Spend time with the fam and the crew. You know we love that delicious KFC, even though we have different points of view. I like what I like, you like what you like. Everybody can't be the same, but when we taste that holiday flavor, you know we are gonna enjoy ourselves. It's a festive feast. When we meet, we bring flavor to the table.
Make every Christmas as unique as the taste of KFC. Enjoy a family 12 bucket, 12 pieces of delicious chicken sides and a 2-liter Pepsi. KFC, it's finger-licking good.
Yeah, man, this is Graham Smog, and whenever I'm rolling through Jamaica, got to keep my radio locked to the Bridge 99 FM. Keep it locked. I also reggae and dancehall music live. See?
people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are discussing where are we now, Jamaica's legislative and policy response to gender-based violence, and we are joined by several stalwarts in the fight against gender-based violence, Professor Diana Fox, Ms. Hilary Nicholson, and Dr. Karen Carpenter. Before the break, Dr. Carpenter, you were sharing with us your perspective on what needs to be done to address the perpetrators. I'll ask you to finish that thought for us, please.
Yeah, thank you, Jade. And I want to also emphasize that as someone who deals with relationship and sex therapy as a psychologist, these are cases that we see repeatedly. All of us who are here today, all 5 of us, have seen these cases repeatedly.
Yes.
And one of the things that we must recognize is that a perpetrator and a victim come together various times. A victim is not necessarily going to want to leave the home, need to leave the home, should not be forced to leave the home unless life is in danger. So we, as those who seek to help, cannot dictate for somebody else what their life is, but we must look at the statistics. When I look at IPV cases, intimate partner violence cases, which are part of domestic violence, what I see is a majority of women and men come back together.
Yes.
So we can pretty much predict that despite how heinous the crime might be, that those partners are going to come back together for many reasons, including that they have children prior to the incident.
Property and
So we
so on.
must insist that the law also take into account the lives of these folks and to make sure there are provisions for rehabilitation for the perpetrator. The victim needs counseling and support, but the perpetrator must go through some kind of rehabilitative process. I think that is one of the bigger criminal acts that we are committing as a society when we do not address the cause of the violence. Again, Hilary mentioned the paltry fines. I think if any Jamaican who is literate looks at fines across the board for traffic offenses, traffic offenses are fined harder than domestic violence.
A seatbelt fine is $10,000, but breaching a protection order is
crazy.
similarly
Did we think
$10,000.
that a human life, when it is in threat for lifelong trauma, is worth less than a traffic violation? You only have to tally them, and you see where we're placing domestic violence. We really have to do better.
You know, Dr. Carpenter, as you talk about approaches, what comes to mind is one thing that we've been observing in our cases at JFJ is victims will often be referred to mediation by the court, for example, along with the perpetrator. So, you know, I'll go to Professor Fox first and ask, you know, what is the perspective on that approach to use mediation in response to domestic or gender-based violence issues? Kevin, if you could assist us with the
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
I was looking at Professor Fox's expression and she almost looked pained before she responded.
Yes.
There are situations in which mediation, I think, restorative justice through mediation is valuable. And again, it has to be supported financially. But I think that it should not be a replacement of some of the things that we're saying by any means. It is one pathway among many pathways, and the requirements that would come under the more punitive measures of increasing the fines wouldn't necessarily accompany mediation. And so that might give a message that the financial suffering, the physical, psychological, and other forms of suffering that are incurred through domestic violence aren't as serious as they truly are.
I don't know if there's any different perspective. Hilary, I think you want to say something.
I recognize that occasionally restorative justice may work, But generally, it is being found that domestic violence cases are not really the right cases for restorative justice. This is because in mediation, very often they're not, because in mediation, the parties sit across one another at a table,
Yes.
and the emotional and power dynamics in domestic violence are very, very complicated. Anybody with whom you have an intimate relationship, household relationship, especially if it is a sexual relationship, there are very strong emotional and power dynamics at play. And the mediators would need to be very carefully trained in gender issues, gender awareness, and power dynamics in order to run that mediation. And restorative justice facilitators, as good and as helpful as they are, they don't have time within their standard training to go through gender awareness training. So when the two parties sit across a table and have to face one another, the fear, the lifelong intimidation that the abused person might have been suffering completely stops them being able to function in a calm way in that situation. It's a very complex situation. And it is because of the emotions, it's because of the power dynamics involved in domestic violence that we agreed, that we recognized 30 odd years ago that it was necessary to introduce domestic violence legislation, and that regular legislation, such as, assault or sexual assault or Offences Against the Person Act, were not adequate to deal with the very delicate relationships that exist in domestic violence. So I'm not sure that restorative justice right now, unless we can build on what we have at the moment as restorative justice. It can't right now respond adequately to mediation for domestic violence. That's a concern that not just me, but that's coming out of the experience of those who are using restorative justice.
Thanks, Hilary, because JFJ certainly echoes that call. And to put in perspective, as you also beautifully and comprehensively outlined, the need for greater comprehensive response as the government looks to amend the Domestic Violence Act, that the throne speech that was presented by the Governor General earlier this year had indicated that the Mediation Act will be revised. So as heartened as we are for the revision to come, we have to ensure that it is supported by the other areas for us to really deal with domestic violence in law.
Yeah. And
could I add one quick thing here?
Please.
That in order for the responses not to be a Band-Aid, but to get at the underlying sociocultural causes and power dynamics that lead to domestic violence, there has to be broad education throughout multiple institutions, and also there has to be counseling and support for offenders. And restorative justice is unlikely to produce that, given the stigma around counseling, particularly, unfortunately, for men. So it is often something that has to be mandated by the court.
Yes.
As we talk about
if I might add, with regard to the mediation, in the same way that we look at a tiered approach as Trinidad has for fines and reoffending, I think we have to think of mediation within a context. And we are seeking to use law to deal with a matter that is psychological. We are avoiding the obvious issue that a batterer is having a psychological difficulty. A majority of men do not abuse women. A smaller percentage of men seek violence as a means of resorting or resolving conflict.
Yes.
And I think we are coming close to looking at the psychological factors in the Sexual Harassment Act. That took a much different approach when we talked about what the tribunal should look like, and that it should be comprised as well of psychiatrists and psychologists. I call this a psychojudicial approach. I think we need a tiered approach even to mediation. We cannot mediate unequal parties. So I agree with Hillary on that. We've seen that. If the perpetrator has not received any kind of assessment, psychological assessment, any kind of rehabilitative treatment or sessions, there is no room for mediation.
Yes.
You cannot mediate with people who are terrified that if they don't agree, that something else is going to happen to them because this has been their experience. And we know from the psychological research, psychiatric research, that trait violence, that personality trait violence is different from public assault.
Yes.
The person who comes up to you and assaults you on the road is experiencing a different kind of violence, because violence has categories, from the person who lies down with you, creates children with you, and batters you at the same time. These are two different kinds of psychological disorders. And we must approach the psychology of the person who's battering if we want change.
Thanks,
Not
thank you.
just
Dr.
fines,
Carpenter.
yes, fines,
Yeah.
but they must get psychological assessment and treatment.
We are upon time, but we just wanted to get just one perspective each. Dr. Carpenter segued into the matter that a number of sexual violence happens within the context of the household, that small community setting, you perhaps your immediate neighbor and so on, to when you look at sexual violence. So, Dr. Carpenter, we also made calls for sexual violence to be addressed. So, I'm not sure if we could just speak quickly on, and we'll ask Hillary and Prof to also speak. What is your urgent call for sexual violence amendment as the government contemplates domestic violence? How do we ensure that the other areas are touched on? One recommendation that you would call for.
Well, I think I just mentioned the one recommendation which I would build on, which is we must have psychological intervention. Sexual violence as it relates to rape, for instance, is violence. It's not sex. We do not classify it in the same way as we do consensual intercourse. It's an act of violence with sex being the weapon. So I think we must assess the psychological wellness or lack thereof of the individual and give appropriate treatments along with penalties, certainly. I am not saying we remove penalties. I'm saying penalties alone won't do.
Thank you.
We cannot rehabilitate people simply by locking them up with people who are worse than them. That's not rehabilitation.
Thanks. Hillary, your one call for a sexual violence amendment?
Oh, sorry, I hadn't heard it before. You're asking for call for generally.
Yes, generally for sexual violence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of legislation, it is absolutely necessary that we redefine rape. In most of the workshops and the training sessions that I'm part of, citizens are appalled when they learn that boy children are not protected. Well, the penalties for the sexual assault, which we would think of as rape of a boy child, is not treated as seriously as the sexual assault of a girl child, which is also referred to as rape. At the moment, there's a very narrow definition of rape. And because of that narrow definition, the penalties associated with forced anal, we have to talk about it, forced anal sex, for example, are lighter than those associated with rape. And people, ordinary citizens, are just horrified at this because there's an awareness of the pervasiveness of sexual assault of children, whether they are female or male. We all know that sexual assault of girl children is reported more because this is the stigmatization of sexual assault against boy children is phenomenal. We don't have time to look about that.
Yes.
So I'm calling for the redefinition of rape so that the sexual assault, i.e. rape, of boy children is treated as rape, and that the penalties are as high, and that would also split off against, for sexual assault of men. I mean, anal penetration. Basically, any kind of penetration, whether it is oral, anal, or vaginal, to get honest about the words, needs to be treated as rape, whether the victim is female or male.
Absolutely. Thank you. And finally, from you, Professor Fox, your call for reform on sexual violence.
Yes. I was going to say a similar thing as Hillary, but I would also add that for both domestic violence and for the Sexual Offenses Act, they need to be expanded to include situations that are involving non-heteronormative and non-binary persons. If only women can be victims of rape, and Jamaica has a very narrow definition of gender identity protections, trans women would be considered men under Jamaican law and afforded no legal protection. TransWave has talked about this. And so that additional element would make the law more inclusive for all persons who are potential victims and survivors of rape under this broader definition.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for joining us. As you know, we talk a lot, so we could talk for several more hours about this. We have spoken for several hours on these topics before in other private settings. So we appreciate you joining us on the show to give some public education on these perspectives. And we look forward to you joining us again in the future. Hopefully, when we're announcing that some of these changes have been implemented as promised. But thanks again for joining us. And we will now go into our second half of the show, or our second quarter of the show.
Take the break first.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christmas is a 10! Receive a top-up from foreign and win a share of over $50 million in cash and prizes from Digicel. Or receive a stay-connected plan. US $20 or more top-up from abroad. Top-up online or in the My Digicel app for chances to win. You could be one of 10 grand prize winners of $1 million or one of 10 weekly winners of an iPhone 14 Pro. Choose Digicel to win this Christmas. Authorized under Section 58.3 of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act. Promotion valid from November 10, 2023 to December 26, 2023.
Ooh la la. I see what I want at Phosphorus Christmas and November sale. November 20 to 30. Kingston, Mandeville, and Montego Bay. Come get your wires, breakers, chandeliers, flood lamps, LED bulbs, standing fans, and so much more. Shop Kingston, Mandeville, and Montego Bay. You can't afford to miss it. Come shop. Come save at Phosphorus Christmas and November sale. November 20 to 30. See you there at Phosphorus.
Christmas is a 10! Receive a top-up from foreign and win a share of over $50 million in cash and prizes from Digicel. Or receive a stay-connected plan. US $20 or more top-up from abroad. Top-up online or in the My Digicel app for chances to win. You could be one of 10 grand prize winners of $1 million or one of 10 weekly winners of an iPhone 14 Pro. Choose Digicel to win this Christmas. Authorized under Section 58.3 of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Act. Promotion valid from November 10, 2023 to December 26, 2023.
You're now in tune to
The Bridge 99 FM
from Jamaica
to the world. Right.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We had a very good discussion on the Domestic Violence Act and other provisions around sexual violence. I think I corrected a statement that I had made earlier that the Domestic Violence Act, the bill, the proposed amendments would be tabled, and then I took it back because of what the clip said. But somewhere I'd heard that it will be tabled today, and I'm actually seeing that it is on the Parliament's agenda to be tabled. I see another part that says to be tabled and taken. So we will watch Parliament today and see again who are those Joint Select Committee members, when the Joint Select Committee sittings will commence, the estimated timeline that the government has in place. So I hope the parliamentary opposition is really doing their work to ensure that these questions are answered. I know the leader of the opposition last week raised some questions around a broader comprehensive response to domestic violence, some of which you heard our colleagues discussing earlier. So we will watch Parliament today and see what happens. We won't be here next week to brief you, but whatever we can share on our social media platforms, we will, and the conversation certainly continues. No, last week Human Rights Day, and I want to read something of interest. You know, I'm trying to follow the younger folks. I do everything on my phone. Well, 2 people called me young last week, or about 3, so I took it with great pride.
Wow, they're so incorrect. You're quite old.
You go about your business. But, you know, serious matter now. The Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs was at an event over the weekend that was apparently hosted by the public defender. And it was covered in the Jamaica Gleaner. And I wanted to read a quote as the Jamaica Gleaner has it. And it says this: stating that the country's crime rate has been a real problem for the Holness administration, the minister expressed disapproval with law-abiding citizens who she said she wishes would let their voices be heard against the criminal elements in the same way that they often let their voices be heard when they raise concerns about the criminal elements. There was another section that the minister stated, and the Jamaica Gleaner quotes, "In spite of our challenges here on the island, we're still better off than many other places. Jamaica is unmistakably a free and democratic society. I just wish that some people didn't know their rights more than their wrongs." Why do I find these comments troubling? Reading the article. When you have cabinet officials basically saying to people, the same utterances that people make online, look at them in the inner city community. Ever come out for gunman, but then now come out to speak against gunman. Now that's a very troubling statement. With the greatest of respect to the minister. And I think we have to be careful what utterances we make. Because I think there's an assumption that if citizens are protesting, for example, when there is a fatal shooting by law enforcement and people are protesting, automatically there is the assumption that somehow these are people just coming out and protesting against the gunman. So the minister invariably has labeled a victim as a criminal. And we have to be careful that we're not reinforcing the stigma against people within the inner city communities, especially within a context where your witness protection programs are so weak and the government has not sought to strengthen it and the provisions within it where people feel compelled and encouraged to speak. And yes, rights have responsibility because your rights end where mine begins. But when the government keeps uttering these statements to suggest that somehow if I speak out and demand my rights, it is a problem and it's an impediment to crime fighting, I find those comments to be troubling. Especially coming from the minister, given her responsibility that she holds. All within Human Rights Day. People know their rights more than their wrongs. Very problematic statement. And I can appreciate the spirit of what the minister perhaps wanted to articulate. That we must have responsibility towards our fellow men and women. But with the greatest of respect to the minister and other cabinet officials, the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, it outlines our rights, but it also places greater responsibility on the state that wields significant power and authority. It is not to say that you out there and so on ought to be doing certain things. The responsibility is on the state to ensure that we are free from torture, unlawful arrest and detention and so on. So I think while we articulate civic responsibility, the laws are there to protect us from criminal elements. But let us not dilute the responsibility of the state by making such utterances. I think it's a little bit irresponsible, if we're being honest. I don't know, Jade, what you think of it. But I didn't like the framing of it and the continued framing when you look at even the memorandum of objects and reasoning on every single crime bill that the government is passing. Our constitution is somehow a problem that needs to be addressed.
You know, over the 16 days, we compiled a post on our social media page that highlighted this very concern. So again, it is even more so concerning that we are still being bombarded with this narrative that your rights are somehow in contradiction to the maintenance of peaceful law and order.
Because when the Constitution was written, just in 2011, it's 2023, apparently when the Constitution was written in 2011, it did not contemplate the levels of criminality in this country. Listen, citizens, we need to wise up, which brings us to another point, Jade. The Minister of Information, in the interest of time. The government, the Prime Minister has also articulated the need to pass a hate speech law. Sounds good. We need to protect the most vulnerable. Yes, we agree?
I'm in full agreement that there is need to address discrimination against vulnerable groups.
Absolutely.
Most certainly.
The comments that we make against people living with HIV, I won't repeat them because I find them despicable and vile.
Yes.
But clearly there is a need, and I don't know how the opposition could ever come to a statement to say that there is no hate speech in Jamaica. Far from it.
Far from it.
However, we always have to look at context within which governments want to pass laws. And when you can have a government through its Minister of Information saying that let us pass hate speech because people want to undermine the state, I want to bring in context in the people. Jamaica removed a sedition law in 2013 that basically was criminalizing libel against state. So in other words, you criticize the state, you find that you can be criminally charged. We already have provisions in place for defamation. So if I say something that impugn my reputation, I will sue you. We have that. You already have provisions you indicated, Jade, under the Offences Against the Persons Act.
Yes.
That deals with what?
Where you make a threatening statement, that is already a criminal offense.
So what exactly is the government trying to solve if you haven't laid the foundation that deals broadly with discrimination? Those who are most in need of that protection is not even guaranteed in law, in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
So when you say you're going to be passing hate speech to deal with people who speak out against the government, listen, people, wise up. Human Rights Day is also saying let's get educated, know our rights, know that we changed the law in 2013 for a reason. Look what is happening in India and other countries like Bangladesh, where press freedom is being undermined when they criticize the government. The starting point for me is very problematic where the government is coming from. But JFJ and our stakeholders, we remain hopeful and open that if it is the government were to introduce or contemplate a hate speech law, we stand ready to support the foundation, which is why we're saying for the Constitutional Reform Committee, expand the protected characteristic where we are free from discrimination on the basis of our color, class, origin, but also sexual orientation, gender, health status. You can't pass hate speech and you don't deal with those things yet.
Absolutely.
Can't.
Absolutely. And we are completely out of time. It's Kimmy, you won your trivia question for this week. And for those of you who have been participating fulsomely in the show, you will be receiving an extra credit over the course of the week. So look out for that if you have been a constant participant. Thank you all for joining us. This was our last episode for the year. So we'll see you again next year, mid-January.
You sound way too excited.
I'm very excited. Thank you.
Sharing the merriment. Have a good Tuesday.
All right.
Jamaicans, for justice, the people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities, no to unlawful detention and police brutalization, class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or Jamaicans4Justice.org.
The people's champion.
If you're in business, get on the bridge. 876-669-5000. If you're in business, get on the bridge. 876-669-5000. If you're in